Welcome to our new episode of Something Completely Different with Len Wilson. I'm Len Wilson, and I'm so excited that you've joined us today because we have a very important topic on tap to discuss, and that is mental health. We've got two very special guests on the show today who are both experts in this field. A great conversation in store for you. But first, if you are new to the show, let me tell you what we mean by something completely different. Our title is a reference to the new creation, which Jesus both describes and launches through his life, death, and resurrection. The Bible talks about a new reality for all of those who have faith in Jesus, not just a kind of a new and improved version of our current world, but what the Bible calls a kainos creation. Kainos is a Greek word for new that means qualitatively different. Something completely different than what we have known in the past. And that's what this show is named after. And this show, we like to talk about what life is like in this kainos creation, this new creation in Christ, how it's different, and how it can change your life for the better. So as we get into this week's issue, topic of mental health, we feel like there's a lot that we can talk about that might hopefully make life better for our viewers. Unless you've been in an undisclosed bunker for these last 2 years, and I'd understand if you have been, you're probably aware of what seems to be a sudden rise in the issue of mental health. I've seen several studies lately. One recent study from Boston University shows that more than a quarter of adults now report symptoms of depression. Another study from the CDC found that 40% of adults in the U.S. struggle with mental health issues. 40%. That study from Boston U, the first one I cited, also reports that this is a threefold increase since their previous study, from 2017, pre-COVID. So just in the matter of 3 or 4 years, we've seen a rise from around 7% to 25% in people reporting symptoms of depression. Perhaps the pandemic has led to new symptoms, or perhaps this has accelerated existing problems. Another survey found that 61% of adults who self-report a disability also have signs of a major depressive disorder. Many experts are saying that the effects of COVID's disruption to our lives are generational. One article talks about what is going on with today's adolescents. I want to read this one segment to you. This article is from CNBC. It says that kids who grow up in this current condition, with the things that they are deprived of, will take these with them throughout their life. The author says, quotes somebody who says, "I hope that as a society, we will do as much as we can to compensate for what is happening and is actually still happening today. For example, you were only a 15-year-old teenager once. Everything we know about brain development, physical development, emotional development, with each age, there's a unique window of opportunities in which to grow, learn, and develop. Milestones linked to age and development are once past, tricky to go back and repair." And it's not just the pandemic either. It's a whole host of causes which have been building, including new technologies such as mobile, the rise of 24/7, ubiquitous, can't get away from it world we live in today. The current adolescent generation, as we're talking about here, is among the most vulnerable. My wife and I have 4 kids, 4 teenagers, although the oldest just turned 20. And my wife is an educator. And so both from her perspective as an educator and our perspective as parents of teenagers in this generation, we see this firsthand. She tells me about the increasing difficulties in the classroom, which I don't know how to overstate strongly enough. The other day, she shared a very sad resignation letter with me that she had received from a fellow educator who had said, quote, "the light had gone out," end quote, and she had to leave the profession and just do something different. Educators are coping with 2 years of students who have been asked to learn without the structure and benefit of a classroom and a mentor to help them learn not just the material, but the means of education itself. The result is that kids are increasingly disengaged and isolated, and they're also increasingly anxious and depressed. This on top of the disruption of mobile technology and the ubiquity of misinformation today. So there's a lot to talk about in this area, and I'm excited to bring on our guests, and we can get into some of these topics and see what we might do to address them. So Josiah, let's bring our guests on and let's get started. We've got here Doug Reed and Shawna Lewis. Welcome. Thanks for joining the show today.
You bet, Len. Good to be here.
Yeah, great to be here.
It's good to have both of you. So Doug is executive director of Beacon of Light, which is a new mental health initiative. We'll get into that a little bit. And Shawna is a licensed professional counselor who's also clinical program manager for Beacon of Light. This is a new ministry of St. Andrew Church. These two are bringing a world of knowledge and leadership to this area. And we're just honored and excited to have you as you get into this. So Shawna and Doug, tell us about Beacon of Light and what you're trying to do about this issue of mental health.
Thank you, Len. You've done a great job of really, kind of pinpointing some of the challenges that we all face today. And here at St. Andrew, the church was really tired of playing defense. We had, several mental health crises. This was before COVID. Not only with our adolescents, but with other church members as well. I've seen this firsthand. We lost our adult daughter right before the pandemic started. So I know the challenges that the community faces. So rather than play defense, the thought was, what can we do to get more aggressive, to start to put some programming in place, not only to really impact the St. Andrew community and the community of West Plano, but our plans are bigger. Our vision's much broader to really take this to churches around the country. And inspired by the teachings of Christ, inspired by biblical principles, because in many cases, in many communities, the church is a trusted partner. And what better place to start providing mental health services. And we're very fortunate in that, Len, as you've learned, and Shawna certainly knows, I'm no clinician, but I've been exposed enough to the challenges of the mental health community to know that we were not going to succeed with Beacon of Life unless we had top shelf talent. And that's really where Shawna Lewis comes in. And Shawna, I'll let you kind of explain your background and,
Sure.
Some of the great work that you've done just in the several months that, Beacon of Light's been up and running.
Mm-hmm. A big piece of what we're doing at Beacon of Light is trying to reduce the stigma around mental health. We want to think that people are educated and that they know about mental health and they would seek treatment if they needed it. But what we're finding is that the people who are reaching out to us here at Beacon of Light so far in the last 6-7 months, this is the first time they've ever asked for treatment. The first time they've ever looked for treatment. And we've seen a range from like 6 years old all the way up into, I think my oldest person is in their 80s. So we're seeing a full range of people that are really embracing seeking help for mental health, which is fantastic. We're doing trainings and workshops at the church and looking at beyond to really educate, reduce stigma, bring awareness about mental health.
Yes.
It's just in the it's in the community, and we need to start talking about it more and more.
So, Doug, you mentioned Plano. We'll stay here. The church over my shoulder, this way. That's the steeple, St. Andrew, which is the founder of both Beacon of Light and of Invite Resources, and so we have this mutual connection here with our church. And I just want to mention it because it's a great anecdote. You were part of the search committee originally. Is this right? So lay search committee, you were heading that up and looking for a program director. But tell me what happened with that search and what was the result of that?
I think the genesis of Beacon of Life was probably 7 or 8 months, pre-pandemic. And as I mentioned, we had lost our daughter, and our founding pastor asked me to be involved in the search. And I said, of course, I'd love to. And we weren't finding quite the right fit that we really thought we needed. And I was sitting at home with my wife one day, and she said, you can do this. And I looked at her. I said, well, maybe, but this is my own church. Can I do it from my own church? And she said, of course you can. And, we started to have that conversation, and my attitude quickly changed from why me to why not me? And, once you start to, kind of change your perspective sometimes, it kind of gives you a launch pad. And, we kind of work things out. And, I get a lot of questions from my former colleagues, what's it like working for your church? And I love it. I get to work with stimulating people like Shawna and Len, and, we're doing kingdom work, and it's going to be exciting.
Right.
That is awesome. Let's get into some of these topics that I was trying to tee up here in the open to the show in terms of the contributing factors and things that have been happening. You mentioned your adult daughter. You mentioned that this was actually pre-COVID. Now we've been through 2 years of disruption with the pandemic, and so there's just a whole host of things. Obviously, one of which I mentioned, I think briefly, here was a disruption through the rise of mobile technology. Shawna, what kind of things have you seen in your practice as an LPC that are related to the use of what you think is probably the use of mobile technology and kind of the impacts and effects that has had?
This, I've been talking to a lot of people about this recently, and it's just the amount of information that kids have access to now. And it's not just the amount, it's the frequency of how often we're looking at our phones, how we're hardly ever put it down. And then just the information that's just constant. It's really what we're finding is that it's slowing down brain development. Just that information overload is constant. And so, I talk to parents a lot about, boundaries around phones. Len has a story about, the earlier and earlier you have about giving technology to your kids. And so then they're like, well, what age should we give them technology? What should we allow on there? How much screen time should they have? And so each family is different, and each family is going to do it differently. And that's what I say. It's a parent decision, but here, let me give you some guidelines, because I'm not going to tell you what to do for your kid, but I'm definitely going to help you understand the gravity of a 10-year-old having a cell phone and social media. And we think, 10-year-olds aren't on social media. Yeah, they are.
They are. Yes, they are.
And it's like they just have access to tons of information. And that really is, I love brain development stuff. And we're just really seeing the impacts, in the last 25 years, that technology has just increasingly gotten more and more. And the just the impact that it's having on our kids, not just brain development wise, but personality wise and
right.
And those types of things.
You mentioned the story. Let me tell that story for our viewers. My kids now, so they're currently 20, 18, 16, and 13. And several years ago, my range was like 9 to 15 years old. And during that window, as my kids were moving up through middle school and high school, there was 5 years in a row in which the average age of the first-time mobile phone user dropped a year, every year. So from the time my oldest was 15, that was when 15-year-olds were asking for phones in schools. And then as my youngest is hitting 10, fifth grade, he's asking for phones in schools. So there's this massive shift, and it's just only continued. And my kids are past this window. I'm sure if you're listening and you've got elementary school kids, you may experience this dynamic. There's pressure in the classroom to have a device, both peer pressure and educator pressure to some extent. So even last Halloween, we were out with our neighbors, and one of our neighbors who knows that my wife is an educator asked her when he should give his first phone to his kid. And turns out his child was in first grade. And so she said, "Oh, no." And so they had this long conversation about that. But that's the pressure that people often feel with these devices. And so there's kind of this real-time society-wide experiment that's happening, right? With the use of these phones, we don't know the effects. We're giving them out, and then we're discovering now the kinds of things. I just thought of this. I saw an article last night. I was going to put it on here, but I don't have it. But there was an article about the rise in Tourette's syndrome. And this exponential rise in the last 2 or 3 years, and some analysts are now saying this is the first social media disease in terms of like there's actual physical symptomatic kind of things happening. And you're the expert in terms of that language, not me. So I get kind of cautious when I talk about this too much. But there was an interesting article about some physical reactions happening because of the presence of these devices.
We are seeing an increase in tics, even like behavioral tics, if that's skin picking or hair pulling, those types of behaviors are increasing. And all of that is really under anxiety disorders. There are behaviors that people suffer with when they suffer with anxiety. And I can imagine, if I were, 12, 13 years old and had constant 24/7 information constantly, I think that, it makes me anxious as an adult. So I can't imagine, being a child and trying to take in as much information as they're taking in, and not having a fully developed brain, and not knowing how to process that information. And, and with social media, it compounds everything. And that's something I do talk to my parents a lot about too. I say my parents, my clients' parents, but they, it's like, what social media should I allow them to have? Should I allow them to have any social media? How do I pick apps and allow them to do? And I am try to stay up on all the new apps that kids are wanting, just so that I'll be fully informed of how they work and how private they are or how private they're not, if they're predatory or not, how dangerous they are.
Yes.
Those types of things that parents should have. It's scary, but parents need to be aware of which apps are going to be more dangerous for their kids, and at what age should they allow their kids to have them, especially with, body image issues and those things on the rise as well, because of social media and the constant comparing on those apps.
And Len, what's equally disconcerting is we're talking about, present day problems.
Mm-hmm.
I would even posit that you fast forward a generation and the impact of social media and the connectedness, the electronic connectedness that our adolescents, early teens have right now. What kind of an adult is that going to create?
Right.
And what are the problems that go along with that too? It's just, it's really something to consider.
We've had conversations here in the office, Doug, about the presence and prominence of misinformation and kind of negativity, and even helping our children and ourselves. I'm not sure adults are any better at learning how to discern, critical thinking, how to know, what's healthy, what's good, what's not healthy, what's not good, and the kind of impact that's happening. I think we had a conversation a few days ago when I was talking about, I'd opened up Instagram and I looked at that little tab. I think it's the search icon, and there's just, I think they call it Explore, and so there's all these images, and I was scrolling through there, and I had the thought, since my education's in media studies, and at one point early on, I had read a quote from an early TV pioneer, a newsman, Edward R. Murrow, who called TV a vast wasteland. And as I was scrolling through that phrase entered my mind. I thought, this is kind of a vast wasteland. But then I instantly think to my kids, and I'm like, how do I help my kids understand? I can't say that enough to them. Right. I don't want to be like a grumpy old man to them, but at the same time, I want them to understand, the difference between what's good, what's healthy, what's not, and how to discern those differences.
That's a great point. Balance. And I think that's the thing. Even as adults, we struggle with boundaries, having balance, having filters, like what to filter out, what to take in. And so just imagine a brain that doesn't have a fully formed prefrontal cortex, not knowing, how to disseminate that information. And so, I think it's and again, I keep going back because, our brains are fully developed and we struggle with it. When we think about kids having to figure out what to believe, what not to believe, how do I know that it's misinformation? How do I know if it's accurate? How do I balance that? Because we would say, oh, we'll talk to your parents about it, but they're not going to. They're going to talk to their friends about it because that's what they do.
Right.
And
but Shawna, what's interesting though is even if our kids, if they talk to parents, we want to believe that as parents, we model, positive beliefs, thoughts, and actions. Right. But, adolescents, kiddos, they look at their parents and they're as glued to the phones. I'm just as guilty as anyone. Right. So, there's kind of there's a takeaway there too.
And I think, that addictive piece, right? It's as adults, we're prone to it too. We're going to, I think Len quoted some research about how often we pick up our phone today, like 150 times.
150 times is what I've heard.
Like,
yeah.
Wow. It we talk about drug addiction and we talk about alcoholism, but we don't really talk about being addicted to the technology, being addicted to the information that we're just constantly. I mean, how many times a day do I pick up my phone and Google something because, oh, I'm just wondering what that is. And it's just at our fingertips. And there are benefits to it. There are definitely pros and cons, but it is trying to help our children figure out where the limits are. And if as adults we don't have limits ourselves, then that makes it even more complicated.
Well, we've had this double whammy of the pandemic too. And, so many adults now are working from home. And, I look at, seniors, for example, the self-isolation, and you combine that with the, preponderance of the media that's out there, some of which is not very, I'm not making a statement here, but it's just not healthy.
Right.
And it's no wonder folks are struggling like they are.
Right.
And so the result, you said this the other day, Shawna, that people are literally losing their minds.
Yes.
Not just metaphorically or as an idiom, but is actually, we're having trouble chemically, right? Neurologically.
Right. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to. But the brain, like it's so, and again, I can like geek out on brain stuff, but the brain will trim things that you don't use. And if we're constantly Googling things and looking stuff up and reading information, we're not really learning and we're not growing our brains and we're not creating new neural pathways. So if we're constantly just doing the same thing, those same neural pathways are just being reinforced and we're not building more.
We're getting in like a biological rut. I mean, literally, like there's that one pathway, right? That's just wearing it out.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely.
Wow. That is sobering and something to think about. So the result from all this, as we're describing, is this steep rise in anxiety and depressive symptoms, depressive disorders. Doug us the other day about a new data algorithm called Glue and what we learned about that in relationship to this issue. You want to talk about that for a second?
Yeah, it's a pretty interesting organization that we here at St. Andrew have partnered with. We're really not sure where it's going to go yet, but they've got some technology that's it's really at a kind of the data mining part. And through participation with them, individuals will be, surfing the internet, looking for information, data on whether it's mental health, anxiety, depression. And if they're in our, service area, that inquiry may be directed back to, in our case, St. Andrew. And we've only been doing this for a couple of weeks now. And when we did it, it was really to grow St. Andrew and expose the message of Christ through St. Andrew to either the unchurched or those who didn't know our church. What we found out is that so many people that are reaching out because of their mental health concerns. And it was just it's been an eye opener, and not sure where that's going to go. But I think Shawna made the point earlier on that so many people that we're hearing from, and I'm sure this is not unique to Beacon of Light, St. Andrew, but to providers everywhere, have never really been in treatment before. And I mean, that's a whole nother story. But is it because it's more socially acceptable to talk about? Has COVID done a better job of destigmatizing mental health? One of the few silver linings with COVID. But people are getting more increase, and these are folks that haven't had any treatment episodes previously.
Let's talk about that. So we've talked about, we've painted a pretty difficult picture here of the world, right? So like into the world, so all this negative stuff. So, but of course, our show is about the new creation. We believe the new creation is not just something for the afterlife, but for something here and now into our body and soul. And so, of course, mental health is a part of that. So that means, of course, that we have hope that we can actually do something about this, right? That we're not just describing something terrible and that it all is lost. And to your point, Doug, the first thing I think that we can say is actually a great silver lining of what's happened with COVID is that it seems like we have broken a long-standing stigma culturally here in these last couple of years. Would you all agree with that? That now we can actually talk about mental health in a way that we were not able to before?
I think that it's not completely broken, but it's getting there. But I
Okay.
think that there are definitely still some stigma around it. I think that people are talking about it more and more, which is fantastic. I think that we still have some work to do in that area. But yes, I do believe that COVID has made it more okay to
Mm.
acknowledge that you have anxiety, or that you're struggling with depression or isolation, or whatever that is. It makes it easier to talk about, because a lot more people are struggling with it, and it's a good excuse to say that you have it, when more than likely you probably had it before COVID, and COVID just exacerbated it.
Yeah.
And what I'm also finding, Len, I certainly agree with Shawna, and not only is it empowering individuals to talk about it themselves, but
Mhm.
I think it's also planting the seeds for, friends, let's say,
Mhm.
to check in on a friend. Hey, listen, I noticed the
Mhm.
other day you were kind of out of it at that meeting. Everything going on? Everything okay in your life?
Mhm.
So, I mean, that's wonderful. We want that. And
Mhm.
for those who are struggling, one of the most important, aspects in their journey is to know they're not alone.
Mm.
Mhm.
And, whether it's reading about, a sports figure or a celebrity,
Mhm.
talking publicly about their struggles,
Mhm.
or it's a coworker, I think that kind of helps people. And, we talk about destigmatizing, and, there have been measures that have been taken. The Affordable Care Act did a good job of trying to put behavioral health care on parity with other illnesses too.
Right.
So we're not at that point where people look at depression as they do a cardiovascular issue.
Right.
Okay. Yeah,
But
that's good.
but
Mhm.
but that's the direction that
That we need to
was
go.
intended.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're our producer Josiah, who's behind the scenes today, participating in this, keeping us all in line. He's
Mhm.
Gen Z. He's the top of the stack in terms of the Gen Z generation.
Mhm.
Of course, my kids are. So if you've got Gen Z kids, if you are a Gen Zer and you're listening, what I've seen personally through my friends, through my kids and their kids' friends, I should say, is that especially in this new rising generation, there's a lot of conversation happening about mental health, and it's really more open. So perhaps this is something that's going to continue to emerge as the new generation develops. In this conversation, so it's kind of both a short term gain right now, but also kind of a long term shift that may be happening.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think that as the generations have gone by from, boomers were definitely, we're not talking about it, let's not talk about it. um, and then Gen X were learn from the boomers, let's just put one foot in front of the other and get it done. But maybe we should talk about it. And then you have millennials who are like, yeah, we should be talking about it, but maybe we aren't. But now Gen Z is just like, yeah, we should be talking about it, and we're going to. So I think it's been a gradual, over the last 40, 50 years, it's been a gradual process of destigmatizing, talking about mental health the way you would physical health.
Mm.
If
And I think, Lynn, that the church has a very important role to play in that, because I
Right.
think for so long, general characterization, this is an observation, not necessarily a criticism, but mental health was not to be talked about. It was so taboo, that often the church is the first place that people turn.
Mm.
And, we've got an obligation. We think we do it, Beacon of Light, to try and kind of flip that paradigm, so that when people do reach out to the church, there is an opportunity to provide some feedback, direction, and resources. But
So along those lines, so then if you're say so, I'm Gen X, Gen Z, parent of Gen Zers. You've got some folks about my age, perhaps, that are listening or watching here. What kind of advice can we give them in terms of day to day things they can do right now to help their kids and their kids' friends with their mental health?
communicate with them. It's I was having a conversation with some parents, and I think that we do not communicate with each other enough. We in families, we have so much dysfunction that we have small talk in our families a lot, but we don't really talk about meaningful things. We don't really spend enough quality time together. We may all, a husband and wife and two kids may be sitting there all in watching something on the TV, someone's on their laptop, two are on their phone, whatever it might be, and you're together, but you're not really spending quality time together. So definitely communicating about what's going on in the world, not just, hey, how was your day at school, but more about what's going on in the world and what's going on with them. And really putting down our devices and spending quality time together, and making a weekly thing with your family or someone close to you, and having that connection, that true connection. I think that connection, communication, and quality time would be my suggestions.
And I think Colin, Shawna, you've nailed it in that it's qualitative, not quantitative.
Right.
And if I look at, the experience that we had with our daughter, wonderful mother, two beautiful kids, wonderful wife, but she shared with us what she wanted us to hear. And if I look back and what could Jill and I have done differently, it's perhaps, repackage or rephrase those conversations and what we were asking about. And it's open-ended questions. It's not yes, no.
Yeah.
And, hey, how was your day, honey, today? Fine. Okay, we go on. Well, that was a mistake.
Yeah.
That was a mistake. And I think if our orientation would have been more toward qualitative questions and digging a little bit deeper, I'd rather have my child say, hey, listen, you're bugging me. Quit asking me so much questions.
Yeah.
Than just take the status quo. And this is true if they're, 13 or in our case, 30.
Yeah. That's my wife and I joke that it's a total fail as a parent to say to your kid, how was your day? Good. It's like you gotta like work the angles a little better, right?
Yeah.
You gotta figure out how to get something out of the conversation. I kind of take it as a little as a challenge. Maybe it's a competitive nature in me, but I'm like, okay, I'm gonna get something out of my boys today. How do I do this?
I love that.
Well, our kids, even though they're not fully developed, they're each unique individual, have their own talents. And that's really a challenge for, us as parents is, we've got to take the time to really drill down and recognize that uniqueness. And we can't, I go back to a football analogy. Jimmy Johnson, former coach of the Dallas Cowboys, someone, once asked him, well, do you treat all your players the same? He said, of course not. Why would I treat all the players the same? They're motivated by different things. They have different talents. They have different aspirations. And that's how we should treat our kids too. Not all of our kids are motivated the same way. They don't want the same amount of recognition. They don't want the same amount of interest and time invested in them. But that's as great. Parents, that's heavy lifting sometimes.
Yeah.
Fair is not equal is what my wife says about that as an educator. Right? So fair is what each situation needs. What about the idea of activity or staying active, the connection between body, mind? Shawna, is that something that you speak to or have read about?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So physical activity is going to release, the good chemicals in our brain. I won't get into which ones, but physical activity is always going to release those endorphins and fun, good chemicals. And so anytime you can go on a walk or a hike or do something active is going to be fantastic. With adolescents, and I know I keep coming back to adolescents, but if you want to have a conversation with your adolescent, the best time to do it is during an activity, because they don't have to sit and look at you, like have eye contact with you, and
that's good.
And have a conversation. It's sitting in the car on the way somewhere, so you're parallel and you're not having to look at each other, or going on a walk, or doing an activity, or playing a game, playing basketball, and talking while you're doing that. So physical activity is going to release good chemicals in your brain, but it's also a fantastic place to have communication.
That's great. That's very good. Let's talk about Beacon of Light, some of what you see happening as you move forward. Doug, perhaps you want to say something. You've mentioned to me some of the big picture, the dreams, the visions of what is how you intend for the ministry of Beacon of Light to affect not just North Texas or St. Andrew, but a broader scope.
Well, Len, you mentioned at the open that I think you said, 40% of adults are challenged by one disorder or another, mental health disorder. Right. I don't know what that number is, but let's call it 100 million. Big number.
Wow.
How many churches are there in the country? Probably 250,000, 300,000 churches, maybe. I don't know.
About 300,000 is what I've read. Yep.
Okay. 10% of those, 30,000 churches are in Texas. And if we think about the concept that in many communities, churches are not only the spiritual partners, but the trusted advisors in that community. And so many people, Shawna shared with us that a lot of the people we're hearing from have never sought treatment before. And I know in my family, we had an issue and I didn't know what to do. It's call Robert, call our pastor. And it's a tremendous opportunity. If we want to think about a mental health strategy that's going to affect as many people as possible, what better place to be than in a church? And as we look at what we're trying to do at Beacon of Light, we really have, 4 pillars. Awareness. We've talked about developing awareness for, certainly for Beacon of Light, but also for mental health in general. A lot of people, I worry a lot. I'm anxious. Oh, now I've got generalized anxiety disorder. Well, they may not know. So to try and elevate those conversations, we want to educate too. Shawna's done a tremendous job of putting together some wonderful packages, for our, pastoral staff and our lay leadership at St. Andrew. We're going to expand that to the broader community and to other churches as well. And we talked about clinical treatment. But when I think about, the kingdom impact of Beacon of Light, it's really trying to penetrate that network of churches around the country. And there's some wonderful programming being done by so many churches right now, but it's primarily resource or referral based. They'll have some links on their website. They can point you in the right direction to a mental health provider. But what we're looking for, Len, is not a one and done. We'd like to develop programming that's going to be more relational. And I look at it as a franchise model. And if you think in terms of, say a Taco Bell, they know what the ingredients are in their food. They know what the packaging is going to look like. They know what their marketing and branding is going to look like. So often, one of the biggest challenges is the real estate itself. That's a big investment. We've already got the real estate. We've got 300,000 churches around the country. Wow. If we can do a wonderful job of developing the right level of curriculum in a dynamic way that's presented in such a fashion that people want more, that it's meeting their needs, and whether that's a one pastor church of 100 congregants or 10 times that size, we want to develop that relationship so they just don't pick some information from Beacon of Light and go about their way. This is going to be dynamic, live. We're going to keep it as present as we can because Shawna knows better than any of us that what we think are evidence-based treatment modalities today may change tomorrow. And technology is a big part of that too. So we want to stay fresh, but we think that we've got the commitment and really the expertise to deliver some programming that can have a huge impact. And it's just the opportunity to use the network of churches that we have around the country. I think it's going to be exciting.
What an amazing vision, Doug. That's so exciting to think that people in full-time ministry and we have people on this call, in my own experience in full-time ministry, one of the hardest things is just the day-to-day work of keeping relationships afloat, keeping kind of the boat moving in the right direction. And oftentimes pastors and people in positions to develop curriculum have zero energy and time for the specialization required to make this happen. So for us to be able to come in like that and say, here's the turnkey solution, you just need to execute this, it puts it into the system and it takes care of all the problems and all the questions that people have to be able to execute it on their own.
Well, it's been a big wake-up call for me, Len, because although Jill and I have been involved at St. Andrew for 35 years now on one level or another, I didn't really have a true appreciation for how challenging and difficult the job of clergy is. Obviously, it's not showing up on Saturday or Sunday and delivering a wonderful sermon. Right. It is a 24/7 obligation. And if we can better arm them and prepare them to really help their congregants with mental health issues and triage those issues, I think we're going to, let's face it, we're here to save lives. I don't know any clearer way to say it.
Yeah. Well, we've mentioned St. Andrew, our kind of incubator, beginner, the founder of both of these ministries. One of the cool things about the work we're doing together, both as Invite Resources and Beacon of Light, is that we get to share space together. We've got this we're in this physical space here together, this little incubator, this startup office. We've got some cool photos. In fact, we can show kind of what this looks like of our space together. So these are office suites across from our church at St. Andrew. And then we have this, we've built in now this great space. You built a treatment room so we can begin to take clients here. As well as continue to develop the resources that we are doing through Invite Resources to better equip both lay people and clergy and people in church leadership roles. So there's just a few shots of our space together. It's really great to get on with you all today and to discuss Beacon of Light, to have an opportunity to share this with our listeners and all that you're doing. It feels like we're just getting started. And I'm excited about what you're going to be doing here moving forward.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Len. There's no telling where it's going to take us, but we reserve the right to course correct as needed. Too. So
yes, please.
John and I are not so bright that we think we've got it all figured out. So we want to learn from the best as well. And you've been very helpful in that endeavor as well.
Well, thank you. It's the work of innovation, as we all know, is constant course correction, right?
Yeah.
So that's very cool. So thank you all. So visit Beacon of Light, mh.org for more information. This is kind of the starter website for Beacon of Light. Y'all are the Beacon of Light. They're working on a more comprehensive website. So bookmark it, visit it. But you can go there now and you can kind of get some basics. You can also have a contact form to get in touch with Doug and Shawna directly through that. A couple of quick things as we wrap up. So speaking of websites, be on the lookout for some more significant changes that are coming to the Invite Resources website coming soon. We've relaunched the new site a few months ago. Things have been going very well with that site, but we're actually going to be adding to it, creating a new content hub, which we are very excited about. Also, in case you haven't seen our two most recent releases, Painting with Ashes by Michael Adam Beck, and which is about online and hybrid worship by Jason Moore, are both bestsellers on Amazon. They have both hit #1 in their respective categories. So 3 cheers for #1 status. Is very exciting to see. That is not easy to do. So a big shout out to Michael and to Jason for achieving #1 status with those respective categories. Also, our next title in Invite Resources comes out in only 6 weeks. It's called Jesus Unchained by Robert Glenn Johnson. And I cannot wait for you to have a chance to see this book. It's a beautiful cover. I'm so excited about this book and all that it's going to do. This is the last episode of season 1. We're going to take a little break, and we come back later this month. We're going to be launching the same show in a new studio, new open, some great new things that are happening. So be on the lookout for that. I'm Len Wilson. And until next time, stay creative.